Hello bookworms! Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in January. Last night, before I was getting my whole video ready, I decided to take a poll on YouTube in like the community tab, and thank you to everyone who voted. I was trying to decide how I wanted to format wrap-ups like going forward because I feel like that's always changing, but I'm going to do monthly wrap-ups at the end of the month. These are just going to focus on books. I'm going to wrap up other media in a separate video, but I was trying to decide how I wanted to wrap up the books, so the choices were either to talk about everything that I read in chronological order, or I could wrap up the books and talk about worst books to best books. Not necessarily that they were horrible, but you know, like leading up to my favorite reads of the month, and that was the option that like overwhelmingly won. So that is what I'm going to be doing, and let me tell you, it was tough to rank these books. I actually really enjoyed the process. It really made me be very thoughtful about the books that I read this month and examine what it is that I got out of each book, what I feel like was the most valuable to me, and that helped me determine my favorites. So basically, thank you for voting for me to do my wrap up this way because I really like it, and I think that this is a really good way to reflect on the past month of reading, and I'm looking forward to continuing this format going forward. So in the video, I will be talking about the books that I read in order from least favorite to favorite. Also, one last thing to say before I get into the book reviews is that I ended up reading a total of 11 books in January, which makes me really happy. I think that that was a really good number for me. And of those 11 books, 5 of them were on my January TBR for the month, and 6 of them were either new books that I picked up that I was like, I need to read this right away, or something that came off of a library hold. So now I'm gonna get into the book reviews. So least favorite book that I read this month, unfortunately, is The Night Country by Melissa Albert. This is the sequel to The Hazelwood. I had initially thought it was a companion novel, but it wasn't. It was like a proper sequel. It makes me extremely sad to say this because I loved The Hazelwood so much, but I really just did not care for this book. I really felt like the sequel was kind of unnecessary, and in this one we are following the fairy tales once they have escaped the Hazelwood and they've all kind of settled in New York City and they're trying to like assimilate themselves into a more normal way of living, until it turns out that there is something in New York that is hunting and killing the fairy tale creatures that have escaped the hinterland, which sounds like it would be really exciting, but sadly it wasn't. I think part of the reason that I also didn't enjoy it is because I didn't really like Alice as much in this book as I did in the first book in The Hazelwood. And I think I was just really disappointed because I don't feel like it lived up to the first book for me. The one thing that I will say is that Melissa Albert did definitely excel when it came to writing creepy, dark fairy tales, and this book was definitely a lot darker than the first one. So I didn't hate it, I just felt really disappointed with it. As I said in my last video, as you guys might know, I've been kind of struggling with YA fantasy for a little while now, so it could also be me. But yeah, it just ultimately didn't do it for me, and I ended up giving this one 2 stars. Next is the book that I talked about in my last video that I probably should have DNF'd this month, and that is Lore by Alexandra Bracken. I do have a couple of very specific complaints about Lore and about why I personally did not enjoy it as much as I had hoped to. The first complaint being, and bear with me, I felt like there was too much action in this book. I tend to enjoy books with a much slower pace where you get to really know the characters and really care about the characters, and this was like the complete opposite. This was a very plot-driven novel. The book is told from Lore's perspective. I know I've talked about it a couple of times, but it basically takes place in modern-day New York City during this hunt called the Agon, where the gods turn mortal for, I think it's 7 days, and they have the ability to be killed, and whoever kills them is the new version of that god. They like inherit their powers. The book was narrated by Lore, so I did feel like I got to know her. But I do think that when it came to some of these supporting characters, Alexandra Bracken definitely relied kind of heavily on the reader having outside knowledge of Greek mythology and like let the reader kind of make their own insinuations about some of the characters based on what you probably have like a basic understanding of going into it, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I just didn't love it. I was surprised at how quickly I was drawn into the story. I felt like it started off on an exciting note, but then when the pace like literally never slowed down, I found myself kind of getting bored. That lasted about from the halfway mark until the end of the book, and I really kind of felt like it was more of a chore to finish reading it than I wasn't like enjoying it. I was just reading it because I wanted to finish. And I think also part of that with like wanting a slower pace is that I never felt like I really had the chance to like sit with any of the things that happened and absorb them and kind of think about them before we got thrown into the next action-packed scene. It was just like action, 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 which ended up feeling a little bit repetitive and boring. This book was sent to me by the publisher, which is largely why I finished it. If I had gotten this one on my own, I definitely would have not felt as bad about potentially DNFing it. And as I mentioned in my last video, I'm going to try to be better about that going forward. But again, take my review with a grain of salt because I have been struggling with YA fantasy and I understand the appeal, and if you're someone that does really like action-packed stories, like this is definitely a book that you should read. And if you want to hear a very positive review of it, you should go to Alexa from Alexa Loves Books' channel. Her and her husband Mackie both read it and they both really loved it, and they have like amazing things to say about it. It just wasn't for me. And I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Next, I read Warped, an engaging guide to the never-aired 8th season of Star Trek The Next Generation by Mike McMahon. This book was a lot of fun. Like, objectively, I can tell you that it's not like a great book, but it was really entertaining and really fun to read. The way that it was formatted was as if you were reading plot summaries for each of the episodes in what would have been the 8th season of Star Trek The Next Generation. This is completely like not actually affiliated with the show. This was somebody who created a joke Twitter account and was just like tweeting one-line plots to things that could potentially happen, and then ended up getting a book deal and expanding on those tweets and turning them into full episodes. So each chapter covers an episode of the 8th season. Typically each episode will have a main plot and a secondary plot. So the first one will be summed up, and then there will be like a little section break, and then you'll get the like B plot summary. And then at the end of each section, it also tells you notable dialogue from the episode and mistakes and goofs that you may have noticed, and it's just really humorous. Like, I thought it was really fun and I had a great time reading it, and there were a bunch of times that I laughed out loud and I actually had to like tell Andrew a lot of the things in it. I really want him to read it because I think that he's going to really enjoy it too. And another thing that I found notably funny, which wasn't intended to be funny, is that at the end of the book, in the afterword, the author writes about how this was like kind of a dream come true for him because he will never work on an actual Star Trek show. Flash forward 6 years later, 5 years later, whenever Star Trek Lower Decks premiered. He's actually the creator and one of the writers on Star Trek Lower Decks, which is an animated series that is kind of a parody series of Star Trek. So that didn't hold up. That was just funny in the sense that he said he would never have that opportunity, and now he is doing exactly what he thought would never happen, which is really cool. So I liked this one a lot. This one I gave 3.5 stars. Then I read Big Magic: Creative Living Beyond Fear by Elizabeth Gilbert. This is a nonfiction book all about creativity. I ended up listening to the audiobook of this, and I did follow along in the physical book here and there. I really enjoyed hearing the book from Elizabeth Gilbert herself. I personally don't think I got as much out of it as other people seem to have. It's not like a new favorite nonfiction read for me, and it's not like a Bible of creativity, but there were some things, some major takeaways that did have an impact on me, so I'll just talk about those for like a minute. One of the things that resonated most with me is that ideas are drawn to motion as opposed to inertia. So an idea is not just going to come to you if you are idly sitting about and, hoping for inspiration to strike. You have to actively be doing things and exposing yourself to new things. And that's really where the thought process comes in and where your mind can have those creative seeds. I do feel like that helped me understand the lack of motivation that I felt for a lot of 2020. I was not at all going out like I normally did, or even just being in touch with nature, going for walks in the park the way that I used to. And I think that that was really telling, and I'm definitely making a bigger effort to make sure I'm more in motion this year. And the other thing that really resonated with me is the idea that sometimes you might have an idea, but there is the potential that someone else could do it better than you had anticipated, and that doesn't mean that you should be sad about it. It means that it's an idea that you decided not to act upon and someone else acted upon it. I like that too, because I do feel like there have been times throughout my booktube history where I've had an idea to do something, and then like a week or two later someone posts that video and I'm like, oh my god, I literally just thought about doing that, and now if I do it, it's just gonna look like I'm copying them. So then I kind of abandon the idea and move on. And I feel like unless you think that there's something valuable that you could add by doing it in your own way and adding your own perspective, it's good to feel at peace with that and to kind of move on to the next idea that will have you acting right away and have you working on it right away, as opposed to like sitting with it and never kind of making it happen. I hope that makes sense. Those were the two things that I felt resonated with me the most out of this book. I enjoyed it, but I didn't get as much out of it as I was hoping to, and I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Next, I have Majesty by Katharine McGee, and this is the conclusion to the American Royals duology. It reimagines the present day in America as if we are following the descendants of the first king, George Washington. And in this book, we are continuing to follow the same characters that we did in the first book, which include Princess Beatrice, her twin siblings, Samantha and Jefferson, and we get the perspectives of the 2 girls, as well as Nina, who is best friends with Samantha, and Daphne, who is Jefferson's ex-girlfriend. Overall, I thought this one was a lot of fun. Things wrapped up in a way that was completely different than I had anticipated. I could see that being an issue for some people, but I personally felt that the way that things did play out felt really true to the journey of each of these characters, and I liked that it left enough ambiguity that there could be the potential for a 3rd novel. I personally really hope that there is a 3rd novel, because there's something that I had expected to happen in this book that we didn't get, and I just think that would be a blast to read, and I'm sure that you know what I mean if you read the book. Oh, I said that the endings felt fitting for each character, but there was an exception of one character who I feel like just got completely burned and ended up with like the short end of the stick. And I would also really like a 3rd book so that that character could have like a little bit of a happier ending. So this one was fun, and I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Then my most recent read was The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. This was Rachel Hawkins' first adult novel, and it's a thriller novel that is pretty much like a gothic story, but it's told in modern day, and it has a twist on the Jane Eyre story, and I personally also felt like there were some similarities to Rebecca. We are following a girl named Jane, and she meets a widower named Edward Rochester, and she kind of manipulates him into a relationship, and the 2 of them are kind of terrible together, and I think that's why I struggled to connect to this book as much as I thought that I was going to. The relationship between them moved really quickly, so it wasn't very believable to me, and each character had their own motivations, so it wasn't like a very romantic kind of relationship, which obviously it's a thriller, so I thought that the thrilling aspect would be kind of the main driving factor, but the romance definitely did play a much bigger part in the story than I expected. That being said, I was really intrigued the whole time that I was reading it, and I read it super quickly because I really wanted to know what was going to happen. I would say that this one served the exact purpose that I wanted when I went in to read it. It was kind of mindless entertainment, but it's not something that I foresee being a memorable story in like a couple months' time. If you want something quick, light, and entertaining with murder, I would definitely recommend checking this book out. I thought it was fun, and I'm definitely up for reading any more thrillers that Rachel Hawkins decides to write, because I imagine that she's just going to keep improving as she keeps writing. And I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. Then I have From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is one that I'm so glad that I got to because so many people have been talking about it. This is the first book in a fantasy romance series. We are following a main character named Poppy who has been deemed the maiden at a very young age, which basically means that she has all of these restrictions that are put upon her. She's not allowed to be touched, she's not allowed to be seen, she has to wear this veil, and she's also not to be spoken to. However, Poppy is kind of spunky and she definitely pushes the boundaries within her world. And she's someone that's craving experience and having some doubts about the things that she's been told. She does still believe everything and believe like the way that their kingdom runs, but she is also a little bit rebellious. Her kingdom is constantly under attack, and during one of those attacks, a member of her personal guard is killed, and his spot gets filled by a new guard who is very handsome, named Hawk, and that is our love interest. I enjoyed this one a lot. I thought it was going to be a YA book, but I quickly realized that was not the case. This is more of a new adult book. There were some steamy scenes in it, and from what I understand, those are like way more amplified in book 2. But I thought that the lore of the worlds was interesting, and I felt like it was pretty well balanced with the romance. It wasn't just like a background for the romance. Like I actually felt kind of invested in the world too, which was nice. The book does involve vampires, which again, something I love to read about. And while this one isn't a new favorite for me, I did really enjoy it, and I am really looking forward to reading the second book. And I'm hoping that maybe book 2 can change my mind and maybe make it a favorite series for me, but we'll see. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Next is If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. This is Frances Cha's debut novel, and it's set in South Korea. And we're following the lives of 4 women and how they're all affected by the incredibly high beauty standards in South Korea. It explores each of their childhoods, their relationships with men, and their relationship with one another. This is a very slice of life kind of novel, so if you're someone that enjoys plot-driven books, this is not going to be for you. This is really a character study, and it worked so well for me. I was pretty fascinated the whole time that I was reading this, and there was more than one occasion where I found myself Googling South Korea plastic surgery until like late into the night. I was pretty horrified to learn how commonplace plastic surgery is in South Korea and how many parents actually give girls plastic surgery as a high school graduation gift. I'm not against plastic surgery. I think that people should do whatever it is they want, whatever's going to make them happy as long as they're not hurting anyone else. But I did think it was really sad that so many girls are pressured into even considering having plastic surgery at such a young age. So I was really fascinated. I was definitely rooting for each of these women the whole time. I enjoyed every single perspective that I read from, and I really like the way that everything tied together. I will definitely be picking up Frances Cha's next book whenever that should come out, but I thoroughly enjoyed this one, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. This is one that I both listened to on audio and read along physically with. This book obviously discusses racism, but it specifically focuses on racism within America and how fighting racist policy is really the top issue that our society needs to tackle in order to hopefully have equality in the future. The book reinforces the fact that you can either be a racist or an anti-racist. There really is no middle ground when it comes to the issue of race. And being an anti-racist is something that you have to continuously be working toward. It's not like you can just be like, I'm an anti-racist now and that's it. Being an anti-racist means continually fighting against racist policy. I think this book really opened my eyes to some issues that I had previously been a little bit blind to, and it really got me to think more critically about race and race relations within America. I read some Goodreads reviews as well because I wanted to get some more perspective on the book, and it definitely led me to want to pick up more anti-racist reads. I even have one of them on my TBR for February. I almost said September. I don't know what month I think it is. But I'm planning on reading Stamped this month, which is co-authored by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds. Stamped from the Beginning is the original full-length novel that Ibram X. Kendi wrote, and Jason Reynolds kind of adapted it for a more young adult audience, so it covers more of the basics, and I do plan on reading both of them, but I'm starting with Stamped. There's also a chapter in this book that touches on Black feminism, and that led me to also put hood feminism on hold for my library, because as much as I valued learning about Black feminism in this book, I feel like it'll be even more valuable to learn about Black feminism from a Black feminist's point of view. If you have not read any anti-racist literature, I do think that this is a good starting point, but I also think it's important to note that it shouldn't be the only book that you read. I think that you should read a wide variety of anti-racist reads, and I have no doubt that by starting here, you will become interested in some other ones as well. So I feel like I got a lot out of this, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. Next is Ikigai by Hector Garcia and Francis Morales, and this book was translated into English by Heather Cleary. I really loved this book, and I felt like it gave me so much to think about. The subtitle of the book is The Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life. And this book heavily focuses on a specific city in Japan called Okinawa, and Okinawa is where there is the highest percentage of people who are over 100 years old. It details the lifestyle in Okinawa, and it expresses the importance of finding your ikigai. There's a Venn diagram back here, so I'm just gonna tell you what that is. It's essentially like the overlap of passion, mission, vocation, and profession. So finding what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you are good at. And it stresses the importance of finding your flow once you've figured out what your ikigai is. It talks about the importance of staying active, of focusing on tasks that you're doing instead of trying to multitask. It has philosophies on your diet, on your outlook on life, your relationship with nature, your relationship with people in your life, and it also touches on gratitude. Early on, I was really intrigued because this book triggered a memory for me from earlier in my life. I vividly remember being in the car with my brother driving home from Target, and he was telling me about telomeres, and this book talks about telomeres in relation to digestion, and the philosophy in here is basically to eat until you are 80% full, because otherwise you will run your body down by having it perform extra digestive processes that aren't necessary. That wears down your telomeres, and the longer the length of your telomeres, the longer the length of your life, essentially. But I had that conversation with my brother, and then I never really heard about telomeres again until I started reading this book, and there they were, and I was like, I totally forgot about that. So that was fun to have my memory jogged there, but there was a lot in here that I want to try to put into practice for my own life. I felt like I got a lot out of it, and I listened to this one on audiobook, also did follow along a little bit physically, but I definitely want to reread this one physically and make some notes and kind of annotate some of the sections that I found the most beneficial. But I truly loved it. I got this book a couple of years ago, and I don't know why I waited so long to get to it. It was excellent, and I gave this one 5 stars. And then finally, my favorite book of the month, and this was actually tough because I really loved Ikigai, but my absolute favorite read this month was definitely The Answer Is by Alex Trebek. This is basically Alex Trebek's memoir. It came out in the summer, and I actually didn't know about it until I stumbled upon it at my library. So I put the audio version on hold, and I absolutely loved it. I pretty much grew up with Alex Trebek. He was a constant figure in my life from the time that I was a baby until now. Until very recently. I've been watching Jeopardy for so many years. My mom would constantly tell me how, when I was a baby, they would put Jeopardy on, and as soon as the, final Jeopardy music came on, I would just be completely silent. and like totally enthralled, and that never went away. I've literally been watching Jeopardy since I was a small child, before I had any idea of any of the answers. But my family has watched Jeopardy together for years, and it's so much fun to like get competitive with one another. And also with the recent passing of Alex Trebek, I was like, oh my god, like I want to know him more, and I feel like I do now. And it wasn't until I started reading it that I really thought about how well I knew this person from the appearances on Jeopardy every night, but how little I actually knew about his entire life, like his whole past and all of the experiences that he had leading up to Jeopardy and even during Jeopardy. It was just completely excellent. And the audiobook was partially read by Alex Trebek and partially read by Ken Jennings. So it was also like really emotional just to hear Alex's voice after he passed away. And this is an audiobook that I will definitely purchase just for that reason. In the book, Alex talks about how he is like a B celebrity, and he's someone that people don't even see as a celebrity. A lot of people think of him more like an uncle, and I couldn't agree more with that. I have always loved and admired Alex. I think that he's just such a gentleman and like encouraging and polite and gracious and just like an all-around A+ human. And his memoir just reinforced that fact for me. I'm so glad that I read this one, and my poor family is still dealing with me constantly telling them little facts about Alex Trebek, like little pieces of trivia, and they're like, okay. Outstanding. I would say this is the best memoir that I've ever read, and I obviously gave this one 5 stars. So those are the 11 books that I read in January. I'm really pleased with everything that I read this month. I definitely found some new favorites, and I just felt like it was an exceptional reading month overall, between going for books that I really wanted to read, learning from some of the choices that I made, and just kind of going with my gut and picking up what I wanted instead of feeling pressure to read things that are new or things that are being discussed more than some of the books that I talked about. Let me know if you've read anything that I mentioned, or if maybe there's a book in here that you want to pick up now that I mentioned it. I'm really hoping that some other people will check out some of the nonfiction books that I read, because my top 3 reads this month were my 3 nonfiction reads. Oh my goodness. So I just realized that my goal for the year was to read 12 nonfiction books, to read 1 per month, and I actually read 4 nonfiction books this month. So I'm already halfway toward my goal, which is like wild. And I guess I'm gonna have to adjust that one. And 2 of the books were also on my 2021 TBR, so that's also exciting that I knocked 2 of those off the list. So yeah, I'm just feeling really great about this reading month, and I'm really hoping that this momentum continues on into February, which is a shorter month, but I'm pretty excited about what I have planned. So that's all that I have for this video, and I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!